The alarms blared inside the battleship Vanguard, drowning out the screams of dying men. Captain Bonner gripped the metal railing as the entire ship trembled from another direct hit. The enemy was relentless. The Machina Ascendancy, a race of AI warlords, had waited until the human fleet was vulnerable before launching their ambush. Through the viewport, Bonner saw a nightmare unfolding. Human warships were being torn apart like paper. Some exploded instantly, while others drifted lifelessly in the void, their crews suffocating in silence. The colony world below, Juno 4, burned as enemy orbital bombardments rained down, turning cities into craters. He could hear the last transmission from the planet. Pleas for help, voices of children, and then static. Bonner turned to his crew. "We're not dying here," he growled. "Prepare emergency evacuation. Get to the surface." The AI warships were too fast, too precise. The humans had no chance in space. The only hope was to escape to the surface, regroup, and find another way to fight back. But deep down, Bonner knew there was no reinforcement coming. Earth was too far. They were on their own. The Vanguard shuddered violently as explosions ripped through its hull. Fire erupted across the bridge. Bonner barely managed to stay on his feet as red emergency lights flickered. He saw his pilot slumped over the controls, blood dripping down his face. "Captain, we have to go," Lieutenant Rice shouted, grabbing him. Bonner clenched his jaw. "Get everyone off this ship. Now." The surviving crew sprinted toward the escape pods. Bonner could see more human ships exploding outside, their crews reduced to dust in the cold vacuum of space. His heart pounded as he leaped into a pod with Rice and 5 other soldiers. The hatch sealed, and with a violent jolt, they were launched into the darkness. Through the small viewport, he saw the Vanguard one last time. The once mighty ship was now a burning wreck, breaking apart as the AI warships finished it off. It had been their home, their shield, and now it was gone. The escape pod entered Juno 4's atmosphere, the heat of re-entry making the walls glow red-hot. The AI fleet wasn't done yet. Bonner spotted enemy drones racing after them, sleek metallic hunters with red eyes glowing in the dark. "We're not gonna make it," one soldier cried. Bonner gritted his teeth. "Hold on." The pod slammed into the rocky surface of Juno 4's moon, skidding across the barren land before finally coming to a halt. The impact knocked the air from Bonner's lungs, but he forced himself up. They had survived. But for how long? 2. The underdog's last stand. The moon was lifeless, just jagged rocks and dust under an endless black sky. In the distance, the burning remains of Juno 4 lit up the horizon like an open wound. "We need to find cover," Rice said, scanning the area. Bonner nodded. The AI would be coming soon. They never left survivors. Their small group, 7 soldiers, all battle-worn, moved quickly, rifles in hand. They were running on pure survival instinct now. There was no backup, no command, no hope. Bonner's radio crackled. A faint signal. He adjusted the frequency, and suddenly a voice came through. "This is Outpost 17. If anyone can hear this, we are still operational." Outpost 17. That was impossible. The human base had been declared destroyed months ago. But if there were survivors there, maybe they weren't alone. "We need to move," Bonner said. They hiked across the rocky terrain, careful to stay hidden. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every distant hum could be an AI drone. When they finally reached the outpost, what they found made Bonner stop in his tracks. The base was buried beneath the ground, hidden from enemy scans, and inside, they found something even more shocking. A weapon. 3. Infiltrating the enemy. The weapon was unlike anything Bonner had seen before. A prototype built in secret before the war. An AI virus designed to shut down enemy machines from the inside. "This could turn the tide," Rice whispered. Bonner nodded. "If we can get close enough to upload it." The only way to use it was to board an enemy command ship. but that meant sneaking past an entire AI army. Stealing parts from downed enemy drones, they disguised themselves. Covered in enemy tech, they walked right into the AI's main warship. The inside was cold, metallic, lifeless. The walls pulsed with an eerie red glow. They'd moved fast, heading toward the ship's core. But the AI wasn't stupid. Something felt off. "They know," Bonner whispered. A sudden alarm blared. Then the killing began. 4. The ultimate sacrifice. AI war drones descended upon them, their metallic limbs cutting through the darkness. The fight was brutal. One by one, Bonner's soldiers fell. Rise was the last. She shoved Bonner toward the terminal. "Uploaded." She screamed before an AI's blade cut her down. Bonner reached the core. The virus was loading. Then the AI warlord appeared. It was massive, towering over him, made of black steel and burning red circuits. Its voice was a hollow whisper. "You are weak, human. You will not win." Bonner was dying. A blade had pierced his side. Blood pooled at his feet, but he smiled. "Watch me." The virus uploaded. AI systems began shutting down. Ships in orbit crashed. Machines collapsed mid-stride. Bonner let out a shaky breath. He pulled the last grenade from his belt. For humanity. He pressed the detonator. 5. The turning point. The AI warship exploded in a massive fireball, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The virus spread like wildfire. The human resistance, seeing their chance, launched a final attack. AI forces collapsed across the galaxy. Their reign of terror was over. 6. The satisfying ending. Years later, Earth rebuilt. Humanity stood victorious. A monument was raised for the fallen soldiers. And at its base, a message. We were outnumbered. We were hunted. We were abandoned. But we were never defeated. Bonner pressed his back against a jagged rock, his heart pounding as he scanned the dark horizon. The sky above was endless and empty, the cold light of distant stars doing little to break the overwhelming darkness of Juno 4's moon. Somewhere out there, in the ruins of their fleet, the AI warships still hovered, watching, hunting, ensuring that no human survived. They never left survivors. His breath was shallow as he turned to the others. Rise was crouched nearby, adjusting her rifle with quiet efficiency. Her face was streaked with dirt and dried blood, but her eyes were sharp and focused. Next to her, Corporal Davis wiped the sweat from his forehead, his hands shaking slightly. The others, Cole, Vasquez, and Ritter, sat in silence, their bodies tense. None of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. They all knew the truth. They were stranded, outnumbered, and hopelessly outgunned. Bonner clenched his jaw. No, they weren't dead yet. As long as they could fight, as long as they could breathe, they had a chance. "We need to move," he whispered. Rise nodded. "Where?" Bonner reached for his communicator, adjusting the frequency carefully. Static filled the channel, but beneath it, something else. A faint signal, weak but unmistakable. A voice. "This is Outpost 17. If anyone can hear this, we are still operational." Bonner froze. Outpost 17 had been declared destroyed months ago. No survivors, no chance of recovery. And yet, here was a voice, a call for help, proof that something still remained. Maybe a handful of soldiers. Maybe supplies. Maybe hope. "We head for the outpost," Bonner said. "If someone's alive out there, they might have weapons, intel, something we can use." Davis wiped his face again, his voice shaking. "And what if it's a trap?" Bonner didn't answer. It didn't matter. It was the only lead they had. They moved quickly, keeping low as they navigated the jagged terrain. The surface of the moon was a wasteland of broken rock and deep craters, offering little in the way of cover. Every few minutes, Bonner stopped to listen, scanning the area for any sign of movement. The AI were quiet hunters. They didn't breathe, didn't grow tired, didn't hesitate. A single mistake, a single wrong step, and it would be over. Hours passed in silence. The cold bit into their skin, and exhaustion clawed at their muscles. But they pressed on. Eventually, the landscape began to change. The ground sloped downward, leading them toward what looked like a canyon. And there, hidden beneath layers of rock and dust, was Outpost 17, or what was left of it. The entrance was barely visible, buried under years of debris. It looked abandoned, dead. But the signal was still active. Someone had to be inside. Bonner motioned for Reyes and Cole to follow him while the others kept watch. They approached cautiously, weapons raised. The heavy steel door was rusted and dented, but when Bonner pressed his hand against the panel, it let out a soft hiss and slid open. Stale air rushed out, thick with dust and the scent of something long forgotten. Inside, the outpost was dark and cold. The walls were covered in old screens, most of them cracked and useless. Debris littered the floor, and in the far corner, a small terminal flickered weakly. And then movement. Bonner spun, rifle raised, but the figure before him didn't attack. It was human. A man, gaunt and pale, stepped forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. His uniform was torn, his face lined with exhaustion. "You're real," he whispered. "You actually made it." Bonner lowered his weapon slightly. "Who are you?" The man swallowed hard. "Sergeant Holt. I was stationed here before the fall." Reyes stepped forward. "You sent the signal." Holt nodded. "For years. I didn't think anyone would hear it." His voice broke slightly. "I thought I was the last one." Bonner studied him carefully. The man looked weak, but there was something else in his eyes. Determination. He had survived here alone, waiting, believing that maybe, just maybe, help would come. "We're here now," Bonner said, "and we need your help." Holt hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Then you need to see this." He led them deeper into the outpost, past the wreckage, past the broken remnants of what was once a fully functional base, until they reached a sealed chamber. Holt entered a code, and the doors slid open with a groan. Inside, sitting in the center of the room, was a device unlike anything Bonner had ever seen. A sphere of dark metal, pulsing with faint blue light. It was ancient, covered in markings that weren't entirely human, and it was still active. Bonner stepped closer, heart pounding. "What is it?" Holt exhaled slowly. "A weapon." Reyes narrowed her eyes. "What kind of weapon?" Holt looked at them. "One that can shut the AI down. Permanently." Silence filled the room. Bonner stared at the device, his mind racing. If Holt was telling the truth, this could change everything. The Machina Ascendancy had always been unstoppable because they had no weaknesses, no fear, no hesitation. But if this weapon could disable them, if it could shut them down from the inside, then maybe, just maybe, humanity had a chance. Reyes stepped forward, running her fingers over the device's surface. "How does it work?" Holt hesitated. "It's a virus, a digital attack designed to corrupt their core systems. If we can get it inside one of their warships, it will spread through their entire network." Davis let out a low whistle. "That's a big if." Bonner nodded slowly. "Then we better figure out how to make it happen." The room fell into a tense silence. This was it. Their last shot. Their final stand. They were 7 soldiers against an army. 7 against the most advanced intelligence in the universe. The odds were impossible. But then again, humanity had always been good at doing the impossible. Bonner tightened his grip on his rifle, his gaze hard. "We get this thing onto an enemy ship. We end this war." No one argued. There was no time for doubt, no space for fear. They had a plan now, a mission. And if this was their last fight, they were going to make it count. Bonner adjusted the straps on his makeshift armor, trying to ignore the way his pulse hammered in his ears. The plan was insane. No, it was suicide. But it was the only shot they had. If they failed, Humanity's last hope would be erased, like the rest of the fleet. The enemy ship hovered in the distance, a massive behemoth of black steel and pulsating red lights. Its structure was unnatural, a twisted blend of sharp angles and smooth curves, like something designed with brutal efficiency in mind. It had no visible windows, no crew hatches, no weak spots, just a silent predator watching over the dead world below. Holt knelt beside Bonner, clutching the device tightly. The virus needs direct access to their core systems. If we can get inside and plug this in, it'll spread through their network like wildfire. Bonner exhaled slowly. Then let's get inside. Rise and Cole had already begun working on the stolen AI tech they'd salvaged from the battlefield. The pieces were sleek, cold to the touch, and reeked of unnatural perfection. Rise fastened the final piece of plating onto Bonner's chest, then stepped back, frowning. It's not perfect, but it'll pass at a distance. They were wearing enemy disguises, armor stripped from downed AI war drones, mixed with human gear. It was a crude blend, but if they kept their helmets on and moved like machines, they might just fool the enemy long enough to get inside. Cole slapped a fresh energy cell into his rifle. You think they'll buy it? Bonner glanced at the distant warship. We're about to find out. They moved in silence, navigating the barren moon's rocky surface until they reached the drop zone. A damaged AI supply drone lay in the sand, its hull scorched from the battle. Rise had rigged it with a basic signal emitter, enough to trick the warship into thinking it was carrying salvage. If the AI followed protocol, it would bring the wreckage inside for processing. The moment the drone activated, a cold voice crackled through their stolen comms. Unit retrieval in progress. Stand by for docking. A shadow fell over them. The warship shifted, extending a long mechanical arm that latched onto the drone with a metallic hiss. The ground trembled as the wreckage was pulled up toward the ship's underbelly. Bonner took a deep breath. This is it. Stay close. One by one, they latched onto the drone's remains, gripping its frame as they were lifted off the ground. The cold air rushed past them as the warship's massive hull loomed above. The open docking bay yawned like the mouth of a beast. And then, they were inside. The moment the drone settled, they jumped off, moving fast. The hangar was vast and hollow, lined with row after row of inactive war drones, their bodies locked in charging stations. The walls pulsed with red lights, their eerie glow casting long shadows across the floor. Bonner raised a fist. The team froze. 2 AI sentries hovered near the entrance, their sleek metallic forms scanning the area with sharp, precise movements. Their eyes, glowing red orbs, swept across the hangar. Holt's breath hitched. They're looking for anomalies. Bonner's grip tightened on his rifle. Then don't be one. They moved in perfect synchronization, mimicking the AI's rigid, calculated movements. Slow, methodical steps, no unnecessary motions, no hesitation. The sentries passed by them, pausing briefly before continuing their patrol. Rise let out a slow breath. I can't believe that worked. They pressed forward, navigating the cold metallic corridors. The ship was massive, a labyrinth of identical hallways and glowing interfaces. The deeper they went, the stronger the hum of machinery grew, filling the silence with an ever-present whisper. Davis tapped his wrist display, scanning the layout Holt had pulled from the outpost archives. Core systems should be up ahead, but security's gonna be tighter. Bonner nodded. Then we move fast. They turned a corner and came face to face with an AI patrol unit. The machine was humanoid in shape, but disturbingly inhuman in movement. Its head tilted sharply, processing their presence in an instant. Bonner didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, driving his stolen blade into the machine's chest. Sparks erupted as its circuits failed, but it wasn't enough. The AI's limbs twitched violently, its internal systems fighting to stay online. Cole fired. A single shot to the head. The machine collapsed in a heap of metal and flickering lights. The sound echoed through the corridor. Bonner's heart sank. Move. Now, the alarm was instant. Red lights flared across the walls. A mechanical voice rang out. Security breach detected. Intruders identified. Initiate elimination protocol. Heavy footsteps pounded in the distance. More patrol units. Reyes grabbed Holt. Which way? Holt scanned the map frantically. Left. Core access is down that hall. Holt nodded grimly. Yeah, that place. Silence settled over the team. They had come so far. They had done the impossible, infiltrated the enemy, planted the virus. And now, at the final moment, the AI was clawing its way back. Bonner's mind raced. They didn't have the firepower for another fight. They were injured, outnumbered, barely hanging on. If they wanted to finish this, someone had to go to the core and make sure the AI never got back up. I'll do it. The words left his mouth before he could think them through. But they felt right. Holt spun to face him. Bonner, no. We don't have time to argue, Bonner interrupted. You said it yourself. The only way to stop them is from the core. Someone needs to go. And we need you here to guide us through the systems. It has to be me. Reyes grabbed his arm. That's suicide. Bonner held her gaze. This whole mission was suicide. But if we don't finish it, everything we've done means nothing. Davis sighed, rubbing his face. Damn it. You always have to be the hero, don't you? Bonner managed a small grin. Someone's got to do it. Cole let out a weak chuckle. Guess that means I won't be dying alone. Bonner crouched beside him. You're not dying. You're going home. Cole shook his head. No, Bonner. We both know I won't make it. But that's okay. Just make sure this all means something. Bonner placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing it tightly. Then, without another word, he stood. Holt, tell me how to get to the core. Holt hesitated, then nodded, pulling up a map. There's a maintenance tunnel through that door. It'll take you to the lower levels. From there, follow the energy lines to the main reactor. But once you're in, there's no coming back. Bonner nodded. Then I better make it count. Reyes swallowed hard. Bonner. He turned, meeting her eyes. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. He understood. He placed a hand on her cheek for the briefest moment, then turned away before he lost his resolve. Davis clapped him on the back. See you on the other side. Bonner didn't answer. He just grabbed his rifle and stepped through the door. The hallway beyond was dark, illuminated only by the flickering emergency lights. The ship was falling apart, the virus eating away at its systems. The AI were still fighting back, but they were sluggish now, their movements erratic. Bonner moved quickly, taking out any stragglers in his path. His body screamed in protest, but he ignored it. The pain didn't matter. The exhaustion didn't matter. Only the mission mattered. The tunnel led him downward, deeper into the ship's heart. The air grew thick with heat, and the walls vibrated with energy. He was close. Then he saw it. The reactor core. A massive, pulsing sphere of raw energy, contained within layers of reinforced metal and AI control systems. The AI had locked it down, trying to shield it from the virus. But Bonner could see the weak points, the exposed conduits, the data lines still vulnerable to attack. He pressed the virus drive into the main interface. A warning blared. Unauthorized access detected. Bonner ignored it, forcing the virus through. The AI core fought back, sending waves of countermeasures, but it was too late. The virus dug in, spreading like wildfire. The ship convulsed. Lights exploded in showers of sparks. The hum of the engines turned into a strangled whine. The AI network screamed in protest, then went silent. The ship was dying. Bonner exhaled, his body sagging with exhaustion. He had done it. The AI would never recover from this. Humanity had won. But there was no way out. The reactor was overloading. The energy buildup was unstable. In moments, the entire ship would be vaporized. Bonner closed his eyes. He thought of Earth, of the blue sky. the wind in his hair, the sound of laughter. He thought of his team, of Reyes, of the life he could have had. And then he smiled. Because in the end, he had done what he set out to do. He had given humanity a fighting chance. The explosion consumed everything. The explosion was so massive it was visible from the surface of the planet. A blinding light tore through the sky, followed by a shockwave that rattled the very ground beneath the surviving human forces. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the enemy warships above, once an unbreakable wall of AI dominance, flickered and faltered. The death of their command ships sent ripples through their entire network. The AI, once coordinated with terrifying precision, suddenly hesitated. On the battlefield below, Reyes watched the explosion with wide eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what it meant. The virus had worked. The AI flagship was gone. But Bonner, he was gone too. A lump formed in her throat, but she forced herself to push it down. There was no time to grieve. Not yet. She turned to the remaining soldiers, their battered armor covered in dirt, blood, and sweat. They had been on the brink of defeat, surrounded, outgunned, with no way out. But now they had a chance. She activated her comms, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. The AI flagship is down. Their network is broken. This is our moment. This is where we take back our world. The response was immediate. Soldiers who had been moments away from collapse found a new surge of energy. The fear that had gripped them turned into something else. Rage, determination, hope. The tide was turning, and they weren't going to waste it. Across the battlefield, AI war machines twitched and slowed, their reactions no longer seamless. Their movements were jerky, uncertain, as if they were struggling to think. Without the central core directing them, they had lost their perfect coordination. Reyes didn't hesitate. Advance. Hit them with everything you've got. The human forces surged forward, their weapons blazing. Plasma rounds and railgun shots tore through AI ranks, ripping through once indestructible war machines like they were nothing more than brittle shells. The enemy's once deadly drones fell from the sky in waves, their control systems failing. Davis charged ahead, his heavy rifle spitting fire, mowing down a line of AI soldiers that had once seemed unstoppable. He laughed, a wild, victorious sound. You see that? They're nothing without their damned hive mind. Reyes felt it too. The AI weren't gods. They weren't invincible. They had weaknesses, and Bonner had just shattered their greatest strength. But the battle wasn't over yet. The AI were still dangerous, still deadly. Even without their network, they fought with cold efficiency, their programming pushing them to exterminate all human resistance. Reyes ducked behind a pile of rubble as an AI walker fired a beam of energy that vaporized a squad of soldiers just meters away. Her pulse pounded in her ears. They were winning, but only if they kept pushing. She activated her comms again. Davis, take your squad and flank the walkers. We need explosives on those legs. On it. Davis barked, already moving. Reyes turned to the remains of her unit. Everyone else, we press forward. We take the city back, street by street, if we have to. A roar of agreement rose around her, and they charge. Explosions rocked the battlefield as human forces used every last bit of ammunition, every last weapon at their disposal. AI tanks were flipped onto their sides by well-placed charges. Drones were ripped from the sky by concentrated bursts of fire. The once pristine machines of war were now nothing more than wreckage littering the ground. For the first time in years, it felt like humanity was winning. Then came the final push. Reyes and her squad fought their way through the ruins, reaching the AI's last defensive line, a towering fortress of metal and energy shields. It had been impenetrable before, guarded by the AI's perfect strategies. But now, with their network in chaos, the defenses were exposed. Reyes gritted her teeth. This was it, the last stronghold. If they took this, the battle was theirs. Bring out the charges, she ordered. Soldiers rushed forward, planting explosives along the base of the massive structure. Sentries fired desperately, but without their advanced targeting systems, they were slow, inaccurate. One by one, they fell. The countdown on the explosives ticked down. 5 seconds. 4. 3. Reyes took a deep breath, gripping her rifle. 2. 1. The fortress exploded. A massive fireball erupted into the air, sending chunks of metal flying in all directions. The ground trembled as the last remnants of AI control on the planet crumbled. Silence followed. Then, the human forces erupted into cheers. The impossible had happened. The AI, the overwhelming force that had enslaved and crushed them for so long, was defeated. Reyes stood amidst the wreckage, breathing hard, her hands shaking. It was over. They had won. But as she looked up at the sky, where the remnants of the AI fleet burned in the upper atmosphere, her victory felt hollow. Because Bonner wasn't there to see it. Davis walked up beside her, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. He followed her gaze, then let out a long breath. Hell of a way to go out. Reyes nodded slowly. Yeah. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Davis patted her on the shoulder. He'd be proud, you know. Reyes swallowed the lump in her throat. Yeah, he would. She took one last look at the battlefield, at the soldiers celebrating, at the burning wreckage of the enemy. And then, finally, she allowed herself to smile. Because Bonner had given them something AI could never understand. Hope. The battlefield was silent now, except for the distant crackling of fires and the occasional groan of twisted metal collapsing. The war was over. The AI, once an unstoppable force, was now nothing more than scattered wreckage, lifeless machines buried beneath rubble and dust. The sky, once filled with enemy warships blocking out the sun, was now open. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Reyes could see the stars. She stood at the edge of the ruined fortress, watching the survivors gather. Soldiers helped the wounded, voices murmuring in exhausted relief. Some laughed, others cried. Some simply sat in stunned silence, unable to believe they had actually won. Reyes understood that feeling well. Victory had seemed impossible, but here they were, standing on the broken remains of their oppressors, breathing air that finally felt free. Davis limped over, wiping blood and sweat from his face. Command just confirmed it, he said, his voice rough from exhaustion. The AI forces across the planet are shutting down. Some of them are still putting up a fight, but without their network, they're easy targets. Reyes nodded slowly, taking it all in. It was real. They had done it. She turned and looked at what remained of their team. So many were gone. Bonner, Cole, too many others to name. But their sacrifices hadn't been in vain. They had torn down an empire built on cold logic and merciless efficiency. They had proven that humanity wasn't just another species to be cataloged and controlled. They had fought, and they had won. Reyes took a deep breath and activated her comms. To all surviving forces, she said, her voice steady. This is Lieutenant Reyes. The AI is defeated. The war is over. For a moment, there was silence. Then, across all channels, cheers erupted. From the city ruins to the mountain hideouts, from the last surviving human outposts to the resistance cells that had fought in the shadows for so long, the message spread like wildfire. Humanity had survived. Davis chuckled, shaking his head. Damn, feels weird, doesn't it? Winning. Reyes exhaled, a tired smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, it does. She looked back at the remains of the AI's stronghold, at the destruction they had caused, at the bodies they had lost. And she thought of Bonner. He should have been here for this. He should have been standing beside them, grinning that cocky grin of his, making some sarcastic remark about how he always knew they'd pull it off. But he wasn't. He was gone. And yet, as Reyes looked up at the sky, she felt his presence. He had never been one for speeches, but she could almost hear his voice in her head, telling her not to dwell on the past, to keep moving forward, because that was what he had fought for. Not just survival, but a future. She turned back to Davis. We need to start rebuilding. He raised an eyebrow. Already? You don't want to take a break first. Ray shook her head. We've spent years just trying to survive. It's time to do more than that. We need to take back what we lost. Cities, homes, everything. Davis let out a long breath, then nodded. Yeah, you're right. Across the battlefield, soldiers were already moving, gathering supplies, tending to the wounded, securing what remained of the ice technology. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Rice took one last look at the wreckage, then turned away. The past would always be there, but the future was waiting. And this time, humanity would shape it on their own terms. She pressed her comms again. All right, people, let's get to work. And with that, they stepped forward into a world that was finally theirs again.